We're going to go through everything you need to know about the rule of thirds. Now, this is a composition technique that you can use on landscapes, on portraits, really on any kind of photo to bring it up to the next level. And there's a couple of things we need to talk about before we get into the kind of meat of what the rule of thirds is and how to use it. The first one is, yes, it's called the rule of thirds, but this isn't strictly a rule. And you should never think that there's a right or wrong way of doing really anything with photography. As long as it looks good, as long as you did it deliberately, as long as you're happy with it, then it's the right way of doing things. So while it's called the rule of thirds, think of it more as a guide. It's a way of getting a composition technique into your photo, getting maybe a better composition in a fairly sort of straightforward and easy way. Now, the second thing that I just want to talk about before we get into it is just actually composition as a whole. Generally, the thing I advise most people on when it comes to composition is that as long as you are making a deliberate choice when you take your photograph, as long as you are making some kind of deliberate action when it comes to placing certain things within your photo, the way you actually frame things, then that's the right way of doing it. There's no super right way or wrong way of composing a photo, and a deliberate choice is always going to beat a kind of spur of the moment thing that you just take on the fly. You know, sometimes you don't have a choice, sometimes there's a moment happening, you need to just capture it, but any deliberate choice when it comes to composition is going to be better than just not thinking about it at all. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about what the rule of thirds is and how you can use it to improve your photographs. So essentially, we're going to be dividing up our image, our photo, into different sections. We're going to have two vertical lines on the image and two horizontal lines. I'll show you now so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And this is essentially a guide, a literal frame of reference to show us where to place things on the image. Now, some cameras actually have the ability to pop this kind of grid over your LCD screen or over inside the electronic viewfinder, which can be really, really helpful. You can do it on your phone, all kinds of stuff like that. So you can actually use that to help compose your image as you're taking the photo. Otherwise, you just have to kind of imagine these vertical and horizontal lines on the image. And essentially, this is a very basic and easy to understand technique to actually compose your photo. So for example, let's talk about a portrait first and foremost, then we'll talk about landscape in a second. So with a portrait, you've obviously got your subject. Now, a lot of people when they first start out will just center up their subject. And what they'll normally do is actually center up their subject's face or head in the very center of the screen on the viewfinder. And that means there's quite a lot of headspace. That means they're right in the center of the image. And that's kind of fine, but it's kind of super boring. You get a lot of unnecessary headspace. It doesn't look as good as it can. Now, with the rule of thirds, what you want to do is actually place your subject on one of those vertical lines. So either to the right or the left. And generally the way you can decide, well, should it be right, should it be left, is which way is their body language facing? Are they facing right? Are they facing left? And either way, you want them to face into the photo. So if they're turning slightly that way, they want to be on this side of the photo, so they're facing in. So you've got the space in front of them. That just feels more open, feels more kind of lively, and it feels more natural and comfortable. And that is a great way of just immediately upping your composition. You've placed your subject to one side instead of center frame, they're facing into the photo, nice and easy. If you're doing a close-up photo, you might want to try and get one of their eyes actually on one of the intersections between the vertical and the horizontal line. And again, you probably want to try and pick the intersection that makes the most sense. You wouldn't pick the bottom right one, for example. You'll have loads of headspace for no reason at all. So you'd probably pick the top right or the top left intersection rather than the bottom ones. That's the easiest way to use the rule of thirds for portraits, but you can also do things like actually have two subjects or have something else in the scene as well, try and position them on the two vertical lines, or have one in the top left intersection, one in the bottom right intersection, stuff like that. They're just natural points that are going to look best in your photo. They kind of work as a natural way for your eye to be guided to where they want to go. This photo, for example, isn't just a straight portrait, it's more of an environmental, kind of almost an action shot really. It's taken on an 85mm lens. So we've got the cyclist going off into the distance, he's placed to the right of the photo on that vertical line, and he's facing into the photo. Even though he's facing away, his body language is facing into the photo. And then we've got the kind of background that he's traveling towards almost going along the other vertical line as well. So it's a very natural flowing photo. And I just used the rule of thirds to compose that, nothing super fancy. I just lined things up the way in my mind with those vertical lines and took the shot. This photo, for example, has my model looking back into the photo again. So while her body isn't necessarily facing into the photo, her face is. So she's positioned on one side, on one of those vertical lines, and then she's facing into the photo. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning, this isn't a hard and fast rule. Sometimes you don't want to do this. Sometimes things work better if you actually center up your model. You know, in this photo of me, for example, I wouldn't have it any other way because the whole photo is designed to be almost like a powerful shot. Yes, I do show this photo in multiple videos because I do really like it. But essentially this is designed to be a powerful shot, so it does want to be centered up. I am the photo in this particular one. Similarly with this photo of my model Matilda, she's the whole photo. You know, I've not got her off to one side, she's just in the center. The story of this photo is her, and she's framed naturally by her kind of surroundings here. So how does this work with landscape? Well, essentially, it's very, very similar. We're still using the exact same grid, we're just changing what we're putting on those lines. So for example, the easiest one is the horizon. You want to position the horizon rather than in the center of the photo, which is what a lot of people will do when they first start out. You want to pop that horizon either on the top or the bottom horizontal line. Now, how do you decide which one? Well, this time it's really about what you want to show off in the photo. Is the landscape the super exciting, important part of your photo? If so, you want to pop the horizon on the top horizontal line. Then you've got 2/3 landscape and 1/3 sky. Is the sky the most important bit? Pop the horizon on the lower horizontal line. That way you've got 2/3 sky, 1/3 landscape. It comes down to what is more important in the photo, the sky, the background, or the foreground, the landscape. Once you decide which one it is, it's easy to just line that up with one of those lines. Now again, there's no hard and fast rule here. For example, reflection shots work really well if you have the horizon right across the middle of the photo. Then you've got the sky and the reflection and it looks really, really nice. That's not going to work as well if you have the horizon on one of those horizontal lines. So in that situation, you wouldn't want to follow the rule of thirds, you'd want to center things up. Now, of course, you can take this another step, pop that horizon on one of those horizontal lines and then try and get one aspect of the landscape, one of the kind of focal points, the subjects of this landscape on one of the intersections between the vertical and horizontal lines. So for example, this photo here, I've tried to put the lighthouse on one of those intersections because it just makes it a natural subject, a natural focal point of this whole image. I've spoken before about how important it is with landscape photography to try and find a subject within the landscape, which acts as a natural resting point for the eye. And in terms of composition, putting that subject within this nice landscape, this nice vista, on one of these intersections is really gonna help in terms of actually drawing the viewer in. That's really just the beginning of the rule of thirds, but that should stand as a good basic guide for how to get started with that. So you can go ahead and use that for portraits, landscapes, street photography, really anything, food photography, all kinds of photography can benefit from the rule of thirds. If you have any other tips for the rule of thirds, of course, pop them down in the comments. Any questions, pop them down there as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.